Welcome to Art and Scroll Studio. I'm Shelley Werner and the host of our Zoominar series where we feature the makers and creators of Judaica art. This episode is the full version of our special guest, Rabbi Peretz Wolf-Prusan, and we are happy to have you here to visit with us. It took place on April 21st, 2021. Please subscribe to our channel so you can be sure to hear of new videos as they are posted. Art and Scroll Studio was born during the pandemic when three women friends got together to scroll the internet and look at something we enjoyed, Judaica arts. And we believe that Judaica is any art that has as its reference point aspects of Jewish life cycle events, aspects of Jewish heritage, Israel, any element of Hebrew, and anything that takes as its source a spiritual reference to Jewish life. Temple B'nai Tikva is our home, and from there we were able to create an amazing environment where we have had a monthly show for the last 8 months featuring a different and amazing Judaica artist. We're here to introduce our guest. Rabbi Mark Glickman is the rabbi at Temple B'nai Tikva, and I would like to invite him to introduce our special guest.
Well, thank you, Shelley, and thank you also to Michelle and Karen for all the work you've done to put this together. A warm welcome to everybody, particularly my many rabbinic colleagues who are joined us, but all of you. We're so glad to see you, and it's really a joy for me tonight to introduce you to my friend Rabbi and my colleague Rabbi Peretz Wolf-Prusan. Peretz and I first met 36 years ago almost. It was in Jerusalem in 1985 when we were both first-year rabbinic students at the Hebrew Union College there. Now, at that time, Peretz had already established himself as an artist. He had been doing Ketubahs, Jewish marriage certificates, and calligraphy and lettering and other art projects, largely in the San Francisco Bay Area. This was a second career for him. And therefore, for us, he was, at the time, just ancient. And I was looking at his bio today, and I realized that at the time he was all of 31 years old when we met him and his wonderful wife, Becky, who's also here tonight. And we studied together in Jerusalem, and then in Cincinnati after that. Peretz strikes everybody whom he knows as a person, just a great wisdom and of great kindness. He is an artist and a rabbi, and for him, those two roles don't diverge because he imbues his art with wisdom, and he imbues his rabbinate, not to mention his whole self, with a beauty that he brings really to everything he does. He worked as the rabbi educator at Congregation Emmanuel in San Francisco for many years, and then in various adult education capacities at Kihila SF and at what was called Lehrhaus Judaica, now is called Hamakom, also in the Bay Area. I know you are going to really enjoy having the opportunity to meet him, as I have had the opportunity to call him my colleague and my friend and to know him for these past 36 years now. And so without any further ado, I will turn our virtual floor over to my friend and colleague, Rabbi Peretz Wolf-Prusan.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Glickman. Really appreciate that. And I'm so delighted now to welcome Rabbi Peretz Wolf-Prusan to the floor to have a chat with me and to discuss some of the backstory of his amazing art. When I think of your work, two things come to mind for me: precision and purpose. There is nothing in your work that is superfluous. All elements are held together in an actual purposeful manner. And we're going to see that. But to me, what that says is it reflects on your direction. The fact is that nothing that you do is random. It's all placed with a very great high degree of intensity and purpose, and that your intent comes through, whether it's Hebrew letters, whether it's a poster, whether it's a social action, you have purpose and intent. your technique leads us to a masterful understanding of your subject. Now, with that, I got to ask you something that I'm sure everyone wants to know, which is, did you want to be an artist when you were a kid?
No,
Okay.
no.
Explain.
Who would want the, no, I think but I wanted to be someone who made things that were useful.
And the reason I ask this is a lot of our artists that we have had on the show, they say, yeah, of course, I was playing with crayons since I was a little kid. And I happen to know that's probably not the case with you. But
No, I was playing with heavy machinery, flame and paint. So it's a more industrial source than gouache, watercolor, and things like that.
so I know that your career has had a lot of interesting twists along the journey because we've been through it and we will go through it in the PowerPoint. But I want to ask you about now. Now that you've been working in art in a dedicated type of manner, is there a division? Do you see yourself first as a rabbi, first as an educator, then as an artist?
No, no. Actually, I don't see these distinctions except in what clothes I have to wear, and what messes I can make. In other words, which also may explain moderate success in all the fields, if not right, occasional outright disasters. No, they're all forms of expression, this nexus or this mixture of text, meaning, purpose, and the visual, and also a kind of communitarianism. And printmaking is a populist art. It's purposeful. It's getting the message out, and so is storytelling. So is teaching. No, I see them all actually around Hebrew letters, just different, like a Rubik's cube. Like if you took a Rubik's cube and painted a different letter of the alphabet on every single square and just kept moving it around, you would eventually hit upon rabbinics, or you'd hit upon text, or you hit upon art, or you hit upon storytelling, and you just keep moving them. So no.
3 no, 2 no's. Let's see if I can make it a third. Do you?
Well,
that's okay. We're good.
a no is as good as a yes if it's the right question.
The question is, for me at this point, since you've done so many things, do you see the work that you do now as an extension of your work as a teacher?
Yes, I mean, things have all yes, the people I met along the way, and I think we're going to hit upon like the Helen Burks and the people I admired like Karita Kent or Ben Shahn. I know I'm getting into the stuff, but there was an unusual mixture of both text, context, and textuality and lettering. So I can turn all your good questions into a kind of affirmation.
And you should, because your work is affirming. And I'm going to say that you are a teacher still, even in your graphic work. You've just translated and transposed the medium so that you're speaking now a different language, or one that you've always spoken. Would that be fair?
Yes.
All right, I got a yes.
We have a winner.
All right, let's delve into the show, because I know that a lot of these questions will be answered as we go through. So you can see the screen then, I assume. So we're going to start here. And this is taking us way back to the beginning. I know that. And I'm glad that it is, because I want to know about the young man that you were, and what did you see growing up in your home?
Well, the home was one thing, but it's my father's shop. So I am the only son of an only son. My grandfather, Max Brzezinski, came to this country from Vilna with a trade. He was a sign painter, and first in the Lower East Side, and then in the in the promised land of Brooklyn. And when I basically in my life in the undeveloped, the far reaches of Los Angeles, California, he hand painted signs and did gold leaf. And my father in the other corner did neon. And so that's why I gave you this image of that Coca-Cola sign I delivered. My father taught me to drive so I could deliver the sign. He was a Litvak, pure, and I delivered every tube of that sign. It's hard to see in the image, but that's the famous Coca-Cola sign. There used to be one in San Francisco, but that's Los Angeles. And my mother, this is my father Nathan, and my mother Lillian, did English calligraphy, Spencerian script, and this is a piece that she finished when she was a student for a time at the Rhode Island School of Design at RISD.
So it's fair to say you were surrounded by fonts and lettering, really, yes, from a young age.
Yes.
That really wasn't a strange world for you.
No, not at all. I grew up in a world of letters.
And so as a man who was surrounded by letters, or a young man, I see that you were very much influenced by someone else who was very defined by the letters. Talk to me about Ben Shahn.
Well, and so the shock of Ben Shahn from when I was very young was, again, the first time I saw someone using text and graphics and engaged in the national conversation of that time. And he was, I mean, I've actually done presentations in my adult life on Ben Shahn, and his first, works for the Works Progress Administration as a photographer, and then his work with Sacco and the Vanzetti trial. It just was his passion and his career. So works like this piece, this is, a biblical verse tied to a graphic image, simple, direct,
it's very
cannot
powerful.
Be denied. And here it is, the same week as we have the George Floyd murder decision.
And I think what you would probably agree with me that in Ben Shahn's work, the white space is as powerful as the space where there is marking.
Right, because his family did not want him to go to art school, but they directed him towards a career in lithography. So he became a commercial printer. So this is, to me, very natural that he would use the white space. And okay, we're still in Los Angeles, and
but I know this is another influence upon you in your graphic development.
Yeah, Sister Corita Kent was just a force in the art world of Los Angeles in the 60s, and by the time I came up in the late 60s. And she also powerfully addressed the war in Vietnam. She took popular verses from songs and poems, and also from advertising, and combined that with screen printing. So Ben Shahn was a lithographer, did a lot of screen printing, but Corita Kent specifically did screen printing because it was cheap, and there was a screen printing corner in my grandfather's sign shop. So I took over that corner, doing work actually for Soviet Jewry. Let My People Go was my first poster. Out Now was my second, but a lot of it was inspired by Sister Corita Kent.
And I think graphically, when we go look at your work and we see it, there's this color blocking here where you see the strong elements is something that is both featured in Ben Shahn and also the work graphically here, but also interestingly, the same sort of dialectic between the text and the image.
Well, they know there's a viewer and they know there's a message.
Mm-hmm. And that's a powerful unity. So who is this also an influence on your life?
So by sheer luck, I arrived at then called UAHC, Union of American Hebrew Congregations, Camp Swig in 1971. I had been working as an assistant to the assistant animator at a Spung Buggy Animation Works in Los Angeles, and there was a poster advertising Isaac Bashevis Singer coming to Camp Swig. And so I got a scholarship, and even though I'd never been to a Jewish camp in my life, I left that job. I went to Camp Swig. He wasn't there. I wanted to go home, but I was persuaded to stay and work with a filmmaker, the late Jim Goldner, who was making a film of his old neighbor from Potrero Hill in San Francisco, Helen Burke, who was the artist in residence at Camp Swig. And without doubt, now, I never met Ben Shahn, I never met Karita Kent, but I actually became a neighbor living at camp with Helen Burke. And she had come to camp.
I'm going to show a picture of Camp Swig. Is that you working there?
So I returned to camp in 1973, and the trouble with Helen Burke is that she set the artistic bar very high. And I, again, through accident of fate, became the art director in the second week of camp in 1973. I had my father mail up my screen printing materials, and we started printmaking at camp because, again, all the same reasons: message, like basically get the message out, teach Hebrew lettering. And there was one young woman, not pictured here, it's Betsy, but there was a young student whose work I kept, Lisa Sloan, who's a professional artist on the peninsula here in California. And one summer, she, with just stencil cuts, made this powerful image because the educational theme of her session was the Warsaw Ghetto. The next summer, we built up the studio to include photo silk screening, and then she did Eli Eli. Just the students astonished me with their capacity to take on this material and create powerful work. And much of it was trying to reach the integrity and acumen of Helen's work that she did with her students.
I have to say here, because I know when we talked about this, and I said, you mean it's a camp like they use popsicle sticks and they made crafts? And you corrected me and said, no, not that kind of camp.
No, lanyards were banned. No, if we made candles, they were Havdalah candles. Swig and Newman, it continues that tradition in some ways, but Swig at that time, because of Rabbi Joe Glazer, had an arts tradition that was equal to none. Very serious. I mean, actually, there are some that were equal to. So I apologize to that. Equal to not many. And Joe Glazer's tradition of having artists come to camp and work with kids was unusual. And in my case, kind of life-saving.
Very, very powerful works. Again, showing the graphics, using the white space, the letters, and I can see why this would have been a driver in your Odyssey. But now we see another view of you, another step taken in your road. And tell us what you were doing here, because I don't think it's in California.
No, so after my first full summer in '73, I dropped out of UCLA, much to my family's excitement. Anyways, I did not return to computer science, and I went to Israel after the war came to that country, and that's me on Kibbutz Re'im with my John Deere 410, quite possibly the happiest spring of my entire life. But also later, as kibbutzniks were returning from the war, from the reserves, I had the opportunity to move to Jerusalem, and I spent day after day in the Israel Museum, and I discovered something that no one had ever told me about, which is there is a long tradition of illumination and art in the Jewish tradition that has nothing to do with the second commandment and other nonsense. I just spent days wandering the halls of the Israel Museum, especially where they had the Ketubot, the Jewish wedding documents from all over the world. This is just one example from the Netherlands. but this was a mind-bending experience.
Great. And it's inspired you to move into an interesting new phase of your career, because you had been doing those large-scale posters, and now we turn to something that is very detailed and very powerful. Tell us what some of your inspirations were.
Well, I was very fortunate because David Moss here in Berkeley had reignited the artistic imagination of doing Ketubot. And by the way, a career doing Ketubot, as David said, is a great way to make a poor living. So, you know, the families would spend thousands of dollars on flowers, and the wedding couple would raise up $50 for a Ketubah. Oh, but what the heck? So I had the art studios actually to myself during the winters at Camp Swig. I also built one in San Francisco, and I received requests from actually some of the rabbinic students I had met in 1973, 1974, and others, and combined Hebrew lettering and lettering in English, and deep use of color to make my own illuminated ketubot. These are one-offs. These are not mass productions.
And I know that you and I have chatted about graphically how you had a certain goal, which was to make a sort of harmonious presentation so that the English would look like the Hebrew. So there would be it would read as one. Is that something?
Yes, I had this really stupid idea to work on a matching Hebrew and English because I thought that was good. And so
it is good.
It is good.
I think, but again, I see, and I know we're going to see this later in your work, but the negative space again, really, especially in your Persian carpet influence there, the way the letters are sort of floating around and being held by the red border, I think is very powerful. And I think that was something calling out to you even then.
Yeah, this one is hard to see, but there's a long tradition of zoomorphic Hebrew lettering where the letters form an image. And I basically, you know, every one of these ketubot that I did in those days was in concert, in conversation and dialogue with a wedding couple. And butterfly emerged as something very important to them. And so, well, it's symmetrical. So the Hebrew's on one side and the English is on another. And I filled up the form with letters.
I think it's interesting when we move on to remember these and to see in a way these powerful use of colors, how it's going to come to play in your future work.
Well, these are all these wonderful screen printing inks that I've been around since I was a child. At a certain point in my life, I had to stop using them. I think I just toxed right out, especially when Becky and I were expecting our first child. But in the meantime, until then, I used these same inks to color the paper, to color the backgrounds. Really, right, you're bold, direct color.
Yeah, it's very intense that you don't really see quite so much nowadays. And I think that's something you had the power to do because you were doing it by hand. And didn't.
Yes.
Tell me what you were thinking when you did this one and what is special about it.
Well, it's really, I mean, an honor is that this is actually included in the book, The Ketubah by Moshe Sabar. I have the last color plate. So there's an accomplishment of well, whatever that means, but it was fun. But these are actually, this is Allison and Paul, and strangely enough, we're now neighbors somewhere here in Berkeley. But this is their ketubah, and they wanted the 7 days of creation. So there is a tradition of panels in ketubot. And so I made each day of creation, right to left, its own panel. And then of course, their text, both Hebrew and English, is above and around. And I tried to evoke each day of creation.
Can you give me a feel for the size of this? A lot of times people do ask me after the program and they say, how big are these? Is it?
These are at least 22 by 30.
That's
Um,
big.
that carpet design one is 30 by 45 or something like that. I had no compassion for their wall space. Um,
You thought it was yours, and you'll take it.
yeah, I just did the
Rightly
work.
so. Rightly so. I think these are stunning and powerful. And again, the color blocking and the intensity of the colors is a foreshadowing of what we're about to go and see. And I know you did not do this piece, but tell us about what this piece means to you.
So in 1981, I had the good fortune of coming to Canada,
Yay.
to Vancouver, to do a whole weekend of things that I was doing at that time: storytelling, a slideshow of Jewish folk art and Jewish art, and also a day of Hebrew lettering, kind of as Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And while I was there, I was brought to the Arctic Loon Gallery, and I met Kotel and Haika artists who were preserving the icons and visual language of lodges in the Pacific Northwest using screen printing. And we had quite a time, because in many ways I was encouraging students and myself. We were putting out art using Hebrew letters, using inventive forms to kind of reinvigorate in the kind of vapid landscape of the 50s, 60s of what was passed as Jewish art was just, the bronze stuff from Bezalel in Jerusalem, and whatever reproductions Chagall had, and try to have a more inventive form, is like an American form. And I found these indigenous peoples' art to be a kind of kindred spirit. And I left them some of the posters from that I had produced for this show in this weekend in Vancouver, and I purchased some of their posters, and they had a direct influence on me for sure.
So let's have a look at what you started to do with some of that influence, because I think it's quite evident. Tell me what your thoughts were in incorporating these colors and choosing these letters.
So these are large prints. These are 22 by 30 or 30 by 45. The one on the left, it's the red and the black, clearly. In these days, my wife Becky, or even before we were married, would go off to work, and she would say, "What did you do today?" And I would say, I made a letter. I just kept I just thinking I was teaching on the side, but I kept working on each letter with brushes, actually 1-inch brushes, until I got it right. And then the Tzedek Emet is justice and truth, which are often found together in Jewish thought. And the one on the right, which drives some people out of their minds, doesn't spell a thing. But each letter has its own physicality. It has its own sculptural form. It's clearly something I got from Helen Burke, who worked in metal. And I found that this Aleph and the Kuf and the Lamed just worked. And that's how that came to be.
Well, I think the work that you were doing subsequent to this, very similarly, where you see the strong, intense colors. And I can also see that you're having fun with it, that you decided to take some of these shapes. But tell me the spiritual intent of some of this lettering. So you
hit upon the word fun. I wanted to share with people for whom Hebrew letters had not been fun, because they're just in the prayer book, or they're just in their lessons. And so I made like payday, just because actually the letter pay is from a drawing of a face, and punim is face, or peh is mouth. And I just had fun with payday. And Ben Shahn had made a alphabet print, and I decided I would too. And so I worked day after day, brushing out the Hebrew alphabet until I got it all right. In fact, there is one oddity in this print. It's not in alphabetical order. The Zayin is not technically where it's supposed to be. It has no meaning that is moved. It just looked better. It fit better where it is.
So on a graphic level, you were playing with these two things, the idea of fun and the idea of graphics. And all in all, it tells it, it's funny with art, you make it and then it has a life of its own. So in terms of communicating.
I want, if at best, I want the viewer to have affection for the Hebrew alphabet. I wanted there to be a kind of take the holy and the sacred out and put the spiritual back in and put the familiar in. I mean, what we lost in the Holocaust in terms of illuminated wooden synagogues of Poland, manuscripts that were stolen by others and burned. We lost far more art than we have. And so I was not trying to replicate that work, but I was trying to bring back the joy of Hebrew lettering.
And I think that there's no doubt when you look at the Big Blue Shindig, that's joyous. Like that, those letters are dancing off the page.
Yeah, it's scary to me when people say, "What does that mean, shindig?" And I become a little frightened. Wait until something might click in but if most people get it right away, it's a shindig. And also heyday, actually heyday in the fall.
I think it speaks for themselves. I think in a way it's hard to actually give words to these pieces because they actually speak for themselves. They're graphic elements, but they also are deep and rich with Hebrew and the implication of the Hebrew and the spaces between, and that gives it a lot of power. But now I know we're going to go to something that has more of a graphic image, and I see the beginning of you integrating English.
Well, in this case, this was a commission from Temple Emmanuel in Los Angeles or Beverly Hills, California, for my bar mitzvah teacher, Ada Scharfman, upon her retirement. And they wanted this verse from the Talmud, one who teaches, I know, I should have said, one who teaches a child Torah as if they had created that child. That would have been the better translation, but that's not what I used back then. And this is one of the few times I drew in terms of a representational form. But Mrs. Scharfman, as she was called, could really light fire under your butt to learn and to perfect your chanting Torah and Haftorah. And I don't think she ever raised her voice. She just kind of raised an eyebrow and you were inspired. So I wanted to make something for her that reflected her love and passion for Torah.
I think that comes across here as a very powerful person that is it's a portrait really. And it's very, very powerfully described. So this piece is now showing you're simplifying a little bit and you're in your direction because it's very succinct. What were you thinking here?
Well, this piece is also very large. This is when I had a printmaking studio when Becky and I lived in Menlo Park, California. So I found this phrase from Nachman of Breslov, every letter is a whole world, Kol ot v'ot haya ola sholem. And it just seared into my heart. You know, of course, every letter is a whole world, but I had not seen it in writing. I had not seen it in front of me. And so I immediately saw this tremendous Aleph, which is in a kind of Prague Haggadah style, an Eastern European book style, and then the lettering below it, and the whole composition, and the size of it, because the originals are very large. They're nearly almost 2 feet by 3.5 feet. They're kind of monumental. Actually, I don't know what to say about it. I can keep looking at it for a very long time, not because I made it, but I kind of fall into the blue of the Aleph, and I see every Hebrew letter, and I see the form of this letter, balanced and strong, and outlasting.
And I think that would, as we come to the end of this period in your life, and we're going to go to the next phase, I think that would pretty much describe the work. It was balanced and it was strong and it was powerful, the work. And I think it was drawing you into the future. And now we're looking at a picture of what because as we were working together, I said to you, what else did you do? You made a few letters, you put up a pay and a hey, what else were you doing with yourself? And I know that for those of us in the audience who are not familiar with you and haven't met you before, part of our Art and Scroll Studio community, please share, what were you doing here? You weren't painting.
No, I did say that in around the time that I started going back to school, heading towards either education or rabbinics, not quite sure. I also I just couldn't deal with the lacquer thinners, the paint thinners, the stuff I'd been around since I was a kid. The fact that any gray matter left is kind of a miracle. And actually, it may actually be descriptive. But we decided as a household that what I really wanted to do was not just repeat text, but also teach and learn more. I had a little bit of art school, a little bit of this, a little bit of UCLA, a little bit of that, adding up to, well, not much of anything. And so I went to the Hebrew Union College, which really was a disaster until I met Mark Lichtman. That really was the turnaround. But actually, people like Mark. I was very fortunate. My first year in Jerusalem were a lot of fabulous people, really young. Many of them had just got out of elementary school, but they were lovely. And it was a wonderful year of learning. And then off to Cincinnati, Ohio. We took Leora with us to Israel, and then we liked Ohio so much we made 2 more. We came back with Avital and Noah, and my first job out of rabbinic school, and the only job I ever had out of rabbinic school in that way, was at Congregation Emmanuel in San Francisco, which was an excellent place for me to, as the educator, to experiment with art. We had a full arts program, but also working with kids and adults in learning. And so that's what I was privileged to be there for 20 years. And apparently there was some significant hair loss, but what can one do?
Well, I'm going to take us now to a picture of your return to camp. And here you are, looking a bit like an older fellow version of the guy we saw a long time ago that was at Camp Swig. But before we talk about this and go into your new and latest body of work, I want to invite people, if they have any questions, to put them in the chat or just post them in the chat. Michelle is monitoring the chat, and we will be sure to pose the questions at the end, because we're about to enter a very exciting phase where we see the new work that is being done. So tell me, you went back to camp.
Well, I had been, on rabbinic faculty in the 90s at Camp Swig, and then Camp Swig was sold, and that was kind of heartbreaking. But the kids then went to Camp Newman in Santa Rosa, which basically inherited the mandate from Camp Swig. And I decided to just, grow up and go where the kids were. But I reapplied for my old job from 1978 as a Hagigah session artist. Hagigah was the art session I had come to in 71, and I taught in every summer from 73 to 78 or so, and then they nicely accepted me, and so I went back. This is at camps. The picture on the left is at Camp Newman. In fact, the wood panel behind is from Camp Swig. Right, and these are my first printmaking students, And these are all with water-based inks. And I did not know how to use them. The kids were pretty funny. One day, one boy looked at me and said, "You don't know what you're doing." I said, "I will by tomorrow." And I did. And we all learned together, which was great because I didn't poison anyone. Actually, I never did, but it was great working with water-based inks. They had greatly improved in the 30 years in between. And so, unfortunately, Camp Newman burned in 2017. It's been rebuilt like a phoenix arising, and it'll be open this summer. But in the meantime, before the pandemic in 2018-19, we were at the Maritime Academy, and that's the two pictures on the right. So it's Camp Newman at the Maritime Academy, formerly Camp Swig. But really, again, loved working with kids and printmaking, and they take over. That's the whole point. It doesn't take a lot to teach them how to do it, and stand back and let them print.
And then they teach you. But now let's go to what is some of the kind of work that you are embarking on now, because it harkens back in many ways to what you started, where you started with text, with Hebrew, with English. But now I see a little bit of your mentors coming through in the political action.
Well, the wonderful thing that happened to me after leaving Emmanuel in 2010 was coming to Lehrhaus Judaica, now called Hamakom. And one of the Lehrhaus functions at that time, besides teaching classes, as I did in Talmud and Jewish philosophy, was conferences. And one of the last conferences that I took part in was in Marin with the JCC in Marin County, and also with the Canal Alliance, which is an immigration advocacy group in Marin, and talk a whole conference on immigration, history of Jewish immigration and immigration. Believe it or not, Marin County has more immigrants from Central America than any other part of Northern California. You just can't see them as you drive over. And so since I was helping to put together this conference, I commissioned myself to make the poster because I wanted to come back into this work. After 20 years at Emmanuel, and I'm in my 10th year at Hamakom, was Lehrhaus, I wanted to get back to printmaking. I wanted to come full circle, but different. And this is the theme of our conference. You know the heart of the stranger, and I did it in obviously in Hebrew and Spanish and English. And this is the design that we used for the conference.
Very powerful. Again, the negative space reading as much as the graphic elements. Now, was this a commission piece, or was this something that you?
Yes, I love taking requests to do work that people want. That's a Ketubah thing. That's a Camp Poster thing. I was a disaster in art school. I had no angst.
Oh dear. Do you have any now?
I was too Jewish to just suffer like an art student. Like, this is it. That's the height of suffering. But this Abby Snay, who was leaving as the executive director of Jewish Vocational Services in San Francisco, and a longtime friend, asked me to take this phrase from Rabbi Tarfon, from Pirkei Avot: "It's not up to you to finish the work, nor are you free to give it up," and to make a print that she could give to the agency, Jewish Vocational Services, JVS, and I did. And then I was contacted by an amazing group of young people, mostly all Jews of color, who are doing a political movement called Not Free to Desist, NFD, Not Free to Desist, with using the same phrase. And they are pushing the Jewish community and Jewish organizations towards equity, inclusion, and diversity. And so they wanted a bit more power from the print, and so I made them a kind of a powered up version.
They're very powerful. Again, your use of the intense color and the hue bringing through the message. So here's a photo of someone that had a lot of influence upon you, because I know that some of these quotes are from somebody else. Can you tell me a bit about that?
So for 20 years, I found ways of teaching Abraham Joshua Heschel at a manual. And I found ways of, well, actually, Heschel was one of the early heads of school of the original Lehrhaus in Germany, the Lehrhaus in Frankfurt. So Heschel haunts me. Heschel is in my head. My children often tease me, how's Hesch today? And then we as Americans put children in cages.
And this is
And I made this print and gave it to various different groups about a matir asurim, to free the captive, free the children. And then I included a teaching from Heschel: indifference to evil is worse than evil itself. Some are guilty, but all are responsible. So there's the venue is the print. The content is our sacred text. He is the teacher, and we are watching it. We're the students. We're trying to engage in this.
And I think the power of the sentences and of the concept and the sentiment comes through even more, because it almost looks like graffiti, the way you've written at the bottom. It almost looks like, you've done that with power and purpose, but not that you tried 35 times to get it right. It looks like you wrote it out.
Actually, that's a wonderful observation, and that's a Karita can't steal or influence. I can't write like she could write, but that Karita Kent was famous for handwriting on the screens, messages from John Locke and Keats and all the Berengers and Pope Pius. I mean, she was communicating messages by hand, and so that's the best I could do.
No, it's like you're channeling the message through your own hand, and it comes through with a lot of power. And I think it's refined in and of itself. So I asked you the other day, what is this on a paper bag?
No.
What is
no,
that?
Not yet. This is on Lakota handmade paper. So I'm in my shed. Becky's in the house, but in between, since we moved to Berkeley, is Becky's garden. We lived for more than 30 years in the inner sunset of San Francisco, where tomatoes go to die. And now that we're in we've returned to where we met, to Berkeley. This garden is all over, front, side, and backyard. And this is from the Talmud of the land of Israel. It's Talmud, and it's in Aramaic, Lafum Ganta Gana. As the garden, so the gardener.
It's very powerful. And how big is this?
Oh, this is not so big. This is about maybe 15 inches by 20.
So I want to go now to some of the work that I know you're doing now. And these pieces, which are very, very specific, they're very purposeful. You've got a concept, and you've got expressed in the most, what would be the most conservative, specific lines. Tell me what happened in your work that brought you back to this kind of amalgamation of shapes.
Well, water-based inks don't do what oil-based inks do, and it's a good thing, because with oil-based inks I was able to do overlays and overlays and overlays and pile it on. And with water-based inks you can't do that. You have to be more precise. And that kind of that restriction became a stimulus to take a word like emet, which is the first letter of the alphabet is the aleph, the middle letter is mem, and the last letter is tav. It's a power word. It goes back to my Northwest indigenous peoples icons. The word emet is just a power term. And there is a beautiful, from Psalm 85, that truth rises from the earth. And I kept it simple. Actually, it's almost going back to the Kwato and Haika art of Northwest Indians.
I want to ask you just a crazy question here about your process. So really there's 3 letters and 2 lines on here. Do you do many studies for this?
That's a really good question. I have a really quick answer. Yes. It takes a lot of effort to do very little.
All right, that's well said. So would you have stacks of paper that have Aleph, Mem, and Taf on the side, and you're rearranging them different ways?
I'm looking around. Yes. There's little pieces of paper and lettering all over this place. Yes, and even the minimalist blue and brown days.
No, it's interesting to know the story, and that's why
Yes.
I said when I started out, I said your work is purposeful. And when I think of it, it's powerful, but it's purposeful. Like everything is exactly so. And these letters are held in attention, where the negative spaces are interacting with the positive black lines. And it's very powerful. And it says truth. So why shouldn't it be powerful? So here's two more in a bit in the series. Tell me about the use of the circle. I see, and talk to me about that phrase.
So my daughter Leora asked me, "Did you just not buy green?" So, well, here's blue. Okay, so the community that I've also been part of for the past 10 years, Kahila, San Francisco, a very beloved community that I was honored to be their kind of rabbi in residence up until recently, when I said I need time to do this. And I said, okay, I'll do high holidays one more time. And God said, good, here's a pandemic. And so we put together, of course, like everyone tried, some, high holiday experiences all on Zoom. But a really good idea emerged to put something on everyone's desk next to their computer. And I commissioned myself to take 2 words, chazak uvaruch, which is a common phrase in Israel. Be strong and be blessed. And I made a little version and a big version. A chazak uvaruch, be strong and be blessed. And then for this version, I went to a new discovery in the past number of years, the early poetry of Abraham Joshua Heschel in Berlin and in Vilna, where he was an up-and-coming Yiddish poet, obviously before the rise of the Nazis, or at least before he was exiled by the Nazis. And this is from one of his poems. Just to be is a blessing, just to live is holy. And then that, by the way, that it reemerges in his philosophy. You can find all of Heschel in his poems. Just to be a blessing is a blessing, and just to live is holy. And it just felt like something that was good to say at this time. And the one on the right is, again, from Pirkei Avot, the teaching of the ancestors. I've been around this phrase forever, and I only, when doing it by lettering, Kashani La'atzmi Ma'ani, did I realize that for the first 2 words, if I am only for myself, and then what am I? But ani, me, ani, I, what am I, are the suffixes. So this is an interesting little meditation. I'd like to go back about 2,000 years and find out what came first, the lettering or the sentence. And the Aleph often stands for a human being, for a Adam, a person.
I think there's lots to see in that, Aleph. You can almost see a person. You can almost see forward movement. It's very graphic and very powerful. And given the emphasis on the ani, up above, it's logical, of course. I mean, that is the beauty of your work, is that once you see it and once you've done your million iterations, when it's done, you go, of course, that's what it is. And that's what's beautiful about it.
Thank you.
So this one is interesting to me because, again, for the same graphic reasons. And talk to me about the blue curve and the phrase that you've chosen here.
So I'm going to make a quick editorial comment, because around the Jewish world these past 24 hours, this phrase has been used about the George Floyd verdict. George Floyd's verdict is not about justice. It's about accountability. So if justice had been pursued, as his family said, he would still be alive and a policeman would not be going to prison. But besides that, Avi Rose was retiring from the executive. I keep doing things for people I know who are retiring. What does that mean, Mark? Anyways, so Avi Rose, a lovely, powerful person, an advocate for immigration rights and gender equity rights, all kinds of rights. He was retiring, and the board commissioned me, because I'm on the board, to do a print in his honor, and they asked for Tzedek Terdof, which I really didn't want to do because it had been overdone, but they really wanted it. And the Tzaddik itself, the letter Tzaddik, that big black thing, is balanced. It is, in a sense, a Tzaddik is a balanced person. The letter Tzaddik is scales. It is balanced on its, in a sense, on one foot. And so I took the phrase from the Bible, justice, justice, you shall pursue, or you shall do, tzedek, tzedek terdof. But I also added Amos. Let justice flow like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. And that's the blue. And what I was doing in a very Ben-Shanian and Karita Kent way, thank you, European Jewish immigrants and Catholic nuns everywhere. I wrote in pencil, not as a title, but as a text. So it would be less posterish. It's hard to see on the slide, but easy to see if you're up close to it. I wrote the text by hand, right where your cursor is.
Yeah, it's very, very powerful. Again, combining all the elements that you've been working with your whole life. Powerful hues, intensity, negative space, but most importantly, a teaching that is both shown in an accessible way, that people who look at it right away understand it. And this is our last image. And this is the one you wanted to end on. Why? Why was this your final word?
Well, the last two are kind of neck and neck, but this one actually came to a request. So I'm very privileged to be represented by George Krefsky, who has now a virtual art gallery, but for many years had an art gallery in San Francisco. And George is showing some of my newer pieces. And he asked for this Elu Ve'elu, which is from the Talmud. It's from Eruvin. It's a discussion about equity and respect between people, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. And a voice from above comes down and says, these and these are both the words of the living God. And in these days where we have a hard time talking, but most importantly, have a hard time listening to each other, again, thank you to the Haida and Kwato traditions of using these strong forms, but I even found a kind of beauty in the simple blue lines, both straight and curved. We live in a days of gender fluidity. We live in times where language is fluid, and I wanted to get a feel of something that is fluid and also something which is straight all together. And I added this text again from the early poetry of Heschel, Um, it's a poem of his that he wrote in Yiddish. So short a distance from heart to heart, if I experience myself, my desires, why not you and yours?
And that is a very, very beautiful sentiment because it's so all inclusive and it so opens its arms. And in a way, the reaching of the Lamed, reaching up, as if to say, to pull in the sky and the red pulling down really creates a universe. And I want to thank you so much for being our treasured guest this evening, because you've so enlightened us in your thoughts and where you got your influence from. And I know that we've been inspired and we've learned, but you're not done yet, because we do have questions for you. I do want to let you know, though, that my partner Michelle is posting in the chat the ways that people can reach you, as well as your gallerist. So that will go in the chat so people can see how to reach you. Now, as Michelle is getting ready with the questions, for those who are here with us this evening, before we go to the questions and I stop the screen share, I want to take one moment and show you the bouquet of episodes that we have had this year. And you can see, if you've never been with us before, that we have beautifully articulated Judaica artists who join us. And you can see we started in October and we're ending April. We have one more episode, which I'm not going to talk about right now because I want to get to the questions, but I just want to make our guests tonight who have never heard of Art and Scroll Studio, I want you to put it on your calendar for next time to join us for more amazing artistry. But before we let you go, it's time to have the questions. So I'm going to ask Michelle if she can pop on and share some of the questions that she has had.
I'm almost speechless. I have to get my voice back. So thank you, Rabbi. You've spoken to our hearts and our souls, and there's so many beautiful messages that we'll share with you afterwards. And people commented the spirituality combined with the playfulness is a really nice place to be late in the evening. And we have a few people who want to go to summer camp with you. So the first question we have was from Isaac, and I'm just going to read it word for word. He is curious if you were influenced by the NorCal psychedelic, typographic work of artists like Rick Griffin or the laid-back SoCal text paintings of Ed Ruscha. And then he adds in later, I guess you were getting him thinking, also Saul Bass.
Oh.
It's a big question.
Well, it is an anachronistic title to a great little film called Why Man Creates, that we used to use a lot in teaching back in my retreat planning days. And yes, Saul Bass, in terms of working a problem, working a design, definitely Saul Bass.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Somebody was really inspired by the Hebrew calligraphy and wants to know, how can somebody go about learning?
Do
this on their own?
Well, in Jerusalem, there is a master Hebrew calligrapher named Izzy Pludwinski, Pludwinski, and he has a great book called Mastering Hebrew Calligraphy. It's really good, and his lettering is extraordinary. So I would say look up Izzy Pludwinski.
Okay, I'm sure they could find that, or even be in touch with you if they couldn't find that later on. Our temple has, and I'm sure a lot of temples and a lot of people on our Zoom tonight are very interested in your activism. So if you could talk maybe a little bit more about some of the projects and collaborations in terms of your activism.
I can't claim to be an activist as I would want an activist to be. I assist activism. I find I'm just getting going, by the way. You're catching me I'm still climbing the hill towards the top, and I hope to do more work, especially when we get out of our houses. But I do find, actually, from the, as I said, my first prints were "Let my people go," "Shlach et ami," and "Out now." And I also know the limited effect of that kind of work. I mean, it does just so much. But if I can help a cause by contributing to it in terms of being physically present or adding to their communications with graphics, I'll gladly do that.
Great.
Well, so we know that you're not at the end of the career, you're just beginning, especially with your art career and with where you want your activism to go and the posters. And I'm hoping you do posters so that we can actually get some. And I can't thank you enough, Peretz, for being such a charming and engaging fellow to work with and patient as we assembled the arc of your work.
I'm very grateful. You're all three of you very professional, and Shelley was relentless, and really appreciate it.